Hi, my name is Ann May, and I want to thank you for joining the Lean Impact movement and seeking ways to maximize the social impact of your work, time, and money. Welcome to the first bonus tutorial, where we'll walk through the process of identifying a solution and putting together a plan to validate it. This corresponds to the first worksheet, the Solution Validation Plan. I should note that the bonus materials are designed as a companion to the book to help you put lean impact principles into practice in your own work. If you haven't read the book yet, I'd encourage you to do so first for a far more in-depth explanation of these concepts, along with a range of rich examples. So let's dive in. The first principle of lean impact is to think big. This starts with an ambitious goal for how you want to change the world for the better. Think of this as your North Star, towards which you'll steer with everything that comes after. Too often, we tend to jump to a solution without having a clear and crisp vision for what success would look like. One reference point you might consider using are the Sustainable Development Goals, which were adopted by 193 world leaders in 2015 as a shared vision for the world's future. The SDGs identified 17 overall goals and set targets for the year 2030. Certainly, you're probably not going to try to address any of these on your own, but you might consider the SDGs as a helpful guide to think about the bigger picture for what you hope to achieve. Think a few levels down from the global goals about what piece you want to focus on and how that could move the needle overall. So first, let's get started by setting a goal. Ask yourself, what does success look like? I want to encourage you to be ambitious. Rather than building your way up based on what seems possible given your resources and constraints, start with the size of the need in the world and what portion you might take on to make a meaningful difference. It's okay if you have no idea how to get there yet. That's the whole point of innovation. When setting your goal, be precise. Think about who you're aiming to target and how many of them. What geographic area are you focused on? And consider what degree of improvement you're trying to make. Are you trying to improve things by 10% or by 10 times? That'll have big implications for the degree of risk you want to take and how you know when you have a solution that's good enough. And think about when you want to achieve your goal. I recommend aiming for at least 10 years out so that you can establish a vision for the long-term success of where you want to get to that will really move the needle. Finally, remember that when setting a goal, you don't want to reference your solution. Think about the ends rather than the means of how you're going to get there. So let me give you an example. For the purposes of this tutorial, I'm going to focus on the issue of youth unemployment in Africa. People have called the situation a ticking time bomb, given the youth bulge and the high levels of unemployment. So on my worksheet, I filled out my goal here of having the rate of youth unemployment in sub-Saharan Africa from 14% today to 70% by the year 2030. So I encourage you to hit pause on the video now and think about what your goal is and fill that in on your worksheet, and then let's come back. Welcome back. So now that you have a clear goal, let's turn to how you're going to reach it. To do so, we'll want to understand the problems that are in the way and pick one or more that we're going to try and tackle. Too often, we can head too far down a path before realizing that we're focused on the wrong problem altogether. Don't assume. The way that we understand problems is by interviewing the people who experience them. So you want to start by identifying and mapping out all the stakeholders. This includes your beneficiaries, your funders, maybe the government, other players who are in the ecosystem which might have some bearing on the problem that you might want to focus on. Most importantly, you want to get out of the building and start doing interviews. This is a key tenet of the lean startup. Ask people, what are their greatest pain points? How have they experienced these problems in the past? What did they do when they ran into these before? And how did they feel about it? Try to be skeptical about your understanding the problem and let your customers tell you what their experience is. Maybe they'll prove you right, but maybe they'll prove you wrong as well. Most importantly, when you're interviewing your stakeholders, don't mention a potential solution. That will bias them and cause the discussion to revolve around your solution rather than understanding their pain points and the opportunities you might have to improve the situation. Take the time to really listen. So I want you to pause the video again here and go out and do at least 10 interviews. I know that sounds like a lot, but try to talk to a range of different stakeholders to get a better understanding of the problem so that we know that when we make a bigger investment, that we're addressing a real pain point that somebody feels and coming up with a solution to improve the situation. So again, please hit pause and then we'll come back. So I hope you found the interviews helpful. Now that you've learned a little bit from your stakeholders about the problems that they're experiencing, let's pick, what will you try to fix? Think about, what is the problem that is most important to solve to achieve your goal? Where are you seeing the greatest unmet need? Is there a place that you feel like you're in a unique situation to make the biggest difference? What seems possible? When you're defining your problem, you want to always think about a specific customer or stakeholder who experiences that problem. This will be a category of people, not an organization in general, but people in a particular type of role. Let me give you an example. So in my example of youth unemployment, the problem that I want to focus on is that youth do not have the right skills to be hired for the jobs that are available. The customers that I'm going to focus on are unemployed youth who are living in cities, as well as the employers who are seeking to hire them. Both of them experience challenges because the unemployed youth are unable to get the jobs, and employers have a hard time finding qualified talent. So now it's your turn. Think about, from your interviews, what did you hear? What is the problem that you want to focus on, and who is the primary customer that you want to address that problem for? Now, with a goal in mind and a problem to tackle, as well as a customer to serve, it's time to turn to what we're going to do, and that's our solution. While a good solution is important, there's a tendency to focus too much on the big idea. Remember, there's no shortage of ideas, and there's a good chance that anything you might come up with, someone else has already thought of. What's missing is often the blood, sweat, and tears it takes to test, iterate, and improve to make a good idea work. That's what innovation is all about. So when coming up with an idea, what's most important is that you bring together diverse perspectives. People who have different views of the problem. Think about the blind people feeling different parts of an elephant. Each of them feel a different part, and together they're able to build a picture of what the elephant looks like. In the same way, bring together your beneficiaries, representatives of different important stakeholders in your ecosystem. You might also think about bringing in people with different expertise, such as an engineer or an MBA, that might just have a different way of thinking about problems. When you're ideating, what you want to do is go for quantity. Come up with the most ideas possible. Encourage wild ideas and defer judgment. So for this next exercise, I want you to start coming up with ideas. Think about, again, bringing diverse people into a room to be able to generate ideas and think about them from different perspectives. What I recommend is asking each individual to generate at least 10 ideas themselves. Then come together as a group to share your ideas, group like similar ideas together, and then add on to each other's ideas, maybe combine ideas and refine them. Then you'll start, once you have a large set of ideas that you're happy with, then you might want to start whittling down and focusing on the ones that look the most promising. Again, refining them. You might want to use a voting system to vote on the ideas that seem most promising, and eventually get down to one idea that you want to start with. And what I want to encourage you to do once you've selected a particular solution is to hold on to it lightly and stay open to the possibility that it may or may not be the right answer. That's what we aim to find out. One of my favorite quotes is, "Don't fall in love with your solution. Stay in love with the problem." So in my example, the solution that I'm going to try out is the idea of doing a 2-week training in person for these unemployed youth to bridge their skills gap and get them ready so that they are in a better position to be able to meet the needs of the jobs that are available. So now it's your turn. Again, I encourage you to pause the video, put together an ideation session, bring in as many different perspectives as possible, and then pick one idea that you want to start with and keep the other good ones on deck, because you may need them if you find out that your first idea is not going to work. For our final section, now that you have a potential solution, you want to find out as soon as possible whether it has legs. It's much better to learn early if your solution's not going to work for whatever reason before you invest significant time, energy, and money into your building and deploying your solution. So to do this, we want to explicitly identify the biggest risk factors, then run tests to validate or invalidate them. When we're thinking about assumptions, we want to ask, what has to go right for this solution to succeed? Well, another way to think about it is, what might go wrong that would cause it to fail? Think about the biggest risks that you're taking on here. What might not go as you expected? I recommend bringing in the skeptics, the people who are most doubtful about your solution, to play devil's advocate. Ask them, what are they concerned about? Why do they think this might not work? The sooner you learn, the sooner you're able to refine, improve your solution, or head down a different path altogether. When it comes to social innovation, there are 3 critical pillars that are necessary for any solution to succeed. The first is value. Is this something that your beneficiaries want, demand, will come back for, and tell their friends and family about? The second is impact. If they do come, will it work? Does it actually solve the problem that you aim to solve? And are there ways for it to work even better? And finally is growth. People may want it, it may work, but can you get it out to all the people who may be able to benefit? Is there an engine that will drive growth to reach the scale of the need? If we don't deliver on all 3, it's unlikely we'll have both the depth and breadth of impact really needed to move the needle. So let's start with the assumptions around value. This is usually a good place to start, because if people don't want what we have to offer, we're unlikely to get very far. So I want you to stop and think about, what are your assumptions around value? Is this something people are going to want and demand? Will they use it when they get it? Will they bring others? Does it address a real pain point or deliver a substantial benefit to them? Do they really see value in what you have to offer? Going back to my example, for my solution of having a 2-week training for youth to build the skills gap, some of the assumptions around value I might have are that these unemployed youth would be interested in coming to and sitting through a 2-week training, and that employers will want to hire these youth that have been trained. I also want to think about the success criteria for this. What does it mean for them to be interested? I'm thinking that 70% of youth need to find this interesting for the solution to be compelling. And in terms of employers, my success criteria is that 80% of the youth who I've trained will be hired. So again, I'm trying to define what are the assumptions and what are the bars for the success criteria required for that assumption to hold true. It's not good enough if only 10% of employers are going to hire the youth, because then I'm unlikely to be able to make a dent in the problem that I'm aiming to do. So now it's your turn. Think about your assumptions for value. Are users going to demand what you have to offer? Will they find it as valuable as you think they do? What might go wrong? I encourage you to bring in some skeptics to ask the tough questions that you might not be thinking of. Write each of your assumptions for value on a Post-it note. Encourage you to hit pause and come back after you've thought through your key assumptions around value and the greatest risks for how this might fail. Now, assuming people are interested and they're going to come back for your solution, will what we're proposing work and deliver the social benefit that we hope? Does it solve the underlying problem or address the pain point? Will people use it properly? Is it actually effective? Does it move the needle enough? And are the effects lasting? Again, I'll go to my example here about unemployed youth. And some of my assumptions might be for impact that the employers will be happy with the performance and youth will stay employed. My success criteria there might be at least 95% of the youth are employed after 6 months, leaving the employers happy and the youth happy, and moving the needle towards my overall goal of reducing youth unemployment. Another assumption I might make is that because it might take a long time before I can realize whether the youth are going to stay after 6 months, that will take at least 6 months to determine, what are the early signs of satisfaction that I might be able to measure to determine that I'm on the right track? So I might look for these early signs of satisfaction and see that whether after 1 month, what's the retention rate? And what are youth and the employer saying? Are they really happy? Or are they struggling at that point? That way I can see earlier whether there might be a problem. So again, now it's your turn. Think about the hard questions on impact. What might not work about your solution if it gets deployed? What might go wrong? How might the effects not last? Again, bring in the skeptics, write your assumptions on Post-it notes, and come back when you're done. Finally, let's turn to our assumptions around growth. If people want your solution and it works when you get it to them, do we have a way to get it to a significant enough number of those who stand to benefit? Think back to your audacious goal or North Star. To reach it, we're going to need to identify an engine that will cause growth to accelerate over time. This usually means that it has to be cheap enough and simple enough so that it can scale. Most often, it also means we're going to have to move beyond donor or charitable funding to a more sustainable model, most commonly through some variation of a business model or government adoption. Some of the questions you might want to ask are, can you keep costs low enough? How are you going to increase distribution to get to more customers over time? Who's going to pay for this? And who's going to do the work to deliver the solution at scale? Is it simple enough to replicate? And what is the engine that will accelerate growth? So going back to my example of youth unemployment, some of the assumptions that I have are, first of all, that some combination of employers and government are going to be willing to pay for the cost of training. My assumption is that the employer will pay for 60% because of the value that they get in having qualified employees, but the government will also be willing to pay from their budget because they have an interest in reducing unemployment for the population. Another assumption I might have is that there's enough jobs that exist that could employ half of the unemployed youth, because if there's not enough jobs, just bridging the gap between the jobs that exist will still leave a significant job. And so what I want to test here is to make sure that the number of jobs, there's enough jobs to cover those 7% of youth who are unemployed. So going back to our exercise here, I'm going to ask you one more time to pause the video and think about your assumptions for growth. Ask yourself the tough questions, get others who are skeptical to ask them for you, and think about what are the riskiest assumptions that might get in your way of scaling your solution. So now that you have your assumptions written down on Post-its for value, growth, and impact, I want you to create a simple graph to map them. You can do this by drawing this on a whiteboard or using masking tape on a wall. You want to create this graph along two dimensions. On the horizontal axis are assumptions that might be slow to test versus fast to test. The easier and quicker it might be to test an assumption, put it towards the right, and the slower and more difficult it will be, put it towards the left. On the vertical axis is how risky the assumption is. You want to put the highest risk assumptions towards the top and the lowest risk assumptions towards the bottom. So take your Post-it notes and map them along these two dimensions. If you find that you have some assumptions that are high risk but slow in the upper left quadrant, think about ways that you might have earlier indicators that could help, that you could test sooner to give you some indication of whether you're on the right track. Again, hit pause while you do this exercise, and then we'll come back. So now that you have mapped your assumptions, the ones that you want to start testing are the ones that are the highest risk. And for ones that are equally high risk, what you want to do is start with the ones that you can test most quickly, then move to the ones that might take more time to realize. Again, if you have some assumptions that are high risk but take a long time to test, look at how you can step back from those and find those precursors that you can test sooner so that you can refine your solution and be more likely to be on target for the longer term results. So now going back to my example of youth unemployment, I've taken the highest risk assumptions, the ones that are above the line in the graph, and filled them in on this assumption sheet. And I've added the level of risk, whether it's critical, very high, or high, and the time that it will take, that I think it will take to test and validate those assumptions. So you notice there's 3 here that I've identified as critical, whether the youth will even be interested in coming to the training and whether the employers are likely to hire the youth, as well as whether there's enough jobs that exist such that doing this all together will move the needle on the problem of youth unemployment. Those are the things that I want to start by testing. Some of the other assumptions here, like around impact, it will take a long time to determine whether employers are happy with performance, but there's something that I could test a little sooner, which is what are the earlier signs of satisfaction. So all these are now part of my solution validation plan, the assumptions I'm going to want to test to see whether my solution is likely to be successful. Congratulations. You now have a clear goal, a problem to tackle, a customer to tackle it for, and a potential solution, along with a plan to validate it. In the next video, we'll walk through the second worksheet and how you can run sprints to test your riskiest assumptions and validate your solution. Thank you so much for joining me today.